She heard the key turn in the lock before she saw him. Rodrigo stepped inside, shaking water from his coat, his shoes clicking sharply against the tile. He didn't say hello, not yet. Not until he'd shrugged off the day like a second skin. "You're still up," he said, more statement than question. Setting his briefcase down with a thud that echoed too loudly in the quiet, Clara turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd read." He nodded, already moving toward the fridge. "Long day, same as always," she said softly. She watched him, really watched him, the way she had for 5 years, learning every shift in his expression like a language only she spoke. His jaw tightened now, just slightly, as he pulled out a bottle of water. He wasn't just tired. He was disappointed. Again. He leaned against the counter, took a long drink, and then, without looking at her, said, "Dr. Mendez called today." Her breath caught. Dr. Mendez, the fertility specialist. The man who'd charted their monthly hopes and failures like weather patterns, predictable, cyclical, and ultimately, out of their control. Oh, her voice barely made it past her lips. Rodrigo finally looked at her. His eyes searched hers, not with anger, not yet, but with something worse, resignation. Another negative. 3rd month in a row. She swallowed. "I know. You knew he called." "No, but I took the test this morning." She set the mug down, her hands trembling now. It was negative. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The rain outside seemed to pause, as if the world were listening. Then he said it, quietly, almost gently, which made it cut deeper. "Clara, what's the point of us if you can't give me children?" The words didn't land like a slap. They settled like dust. Fine, invisible, but impossible to breathe through. She blinked, once, twice, trying to keep the tears from falling. "Not here. Not in front of him. I thought we were more than that." He ran a hand through his damp hair, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. "Of course we are. But a family, a real family, it needs children. Is what we planned. What I need." Her chest ached, hollowed out by something she couldn't name. Grief. Maybe. For the future that kept slipping through her fingers like smoke. She wanted to tell him about the dreams she'd had since she was 16, not just of motherhood, but of his hand holding hers in a hospital room, of him teaching their child to ride a bike, of laughter echoing in a house that finally felt full. But instead, she whispered, "What if my body says no?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was softer, almost sad. "Then maybe you're just not meant for this." The words hung there, final and cold. Clara turned back to the window, watching the rain blur the world into watercolor. She didn't cry, not yet, but somewhere deep inside, a quiet fracture spread. A crack in the foundation of everything she believed about love, worth, and herself. She loved him. God, she loved him. But in that moment, standing in the kitchen that had once smelled of cinnamon and Sunday pancakes, she felt utterly, devastatingly useless. Not because she couldn't conceive, but because the man she'd built her life around had just made her feel like she had nothing left to offer. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, something in Clara began to break, and something else, quieter and stronger, began to stir. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio tópico tu com dialogo como seu fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com vida moco. Com os sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters Quinn 3, max. The town of Elmhaven wasn't on most maps. Just a quiet cluster of brick homes, a single bakery that opened at dawn, and a church spire that caught the morning light like a promise. Everyone knew everyone, and that was both a comfort and a cage. Clara had grown up here, walked these same streets with skinned knees and dreams too big for her shoebox bedroom. Now, married and living just 3 blocks from her childhood home, she often felt like she was performing a role written by someone else. Every Sunday after Mass, neighbors would gather on Mrs. Calloway's porch, sipping lemonade and catching up in that gentle, probing way small towns do. Still hoping for little ones, Clara, Aunt Miriam would ask, patting her hand with wrinkled fingers, her voice dripping with sympathy that stung more than scorn. God works in his time, dear. Don't lose hope. Clara would smile, always smile, and murmur something vague about waiting patiently. But inside, each word felt like a stone dropped into her stomach. She could feel Rodrigo tense beside her, his silence louder than any reply. At home, the pressure wasn't spoken. It lived in the space between things. In the way the nursery door stayed closed, though it had been painted pale yellow 2 years ago with such trembling excitement. In the way Rodrigo's gaze lingered on other families at the market, watching toddlers stumble after shopping carts, mothers laugh as they adjusted tiny hats. One evening, as they washed dishes side by side, steam rising between them like a ghost of intimacy, Clara finally broke the silence. Do you ever think, maybe we're enough just us? Rodrigo paused, soap suds clinging to his hands. He didn't look at her. Enough for what? Clara, for dinner, for weekends, sure. But a legacy, a family name, that's not built on just us. He rinsed the plate with sharper force than necessary. My father had 3 sons. His father before him 5. Our name doesn't just end. She stared at her reflection in the soapy water, blurred, distorted. What if it's not about names? What if it's about love? He turned then, his eyes tired, not angry. Love doesn't fill a crib, Clara. Love doesn't carry on your blood. Her breath hitched. She wanted to say, but what if love is the only thing that ever truly does, but the words died in her throat. She'd said them before, in softer moments, during candlelit nights when they still touched without calculation. Back then, he'd hold her and whisper, we'll get there. Now, there felt like a country she'd never be allowed to enter. Outside, children's laughter floated from the park down the street, bright, careless. Clara's chest tightened. She loved this town, its mossy sidewalks and gossiping sparrows, but lately, it felt like every window held a mirror showing her what she lacked. Later that week, at the bakery, old Mr. Ellis handed her a cinnamon roll with a wink. Saving room for baby snacks soon. He chuckled. Clara forced a laugh, but her hands shook as she took the paper bag. She walked home in silence, the sweet smell of pastry turning sour in her stomach. That night, she lay awake while Rodrigo slept beside her, his breathing even, untroubled. She traced the outline of her own body under the sheets, this body that functioned in every way except the one that mattered most to him. She wasn't broken. She knew that deep down, but knowing it and feeling it were 2 different worlds, and she was stranded between them. The town didn't hate her. It simply didn't see her, not as she was, but as the absence she represented. And in that quiet, constant erasure, Clara began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd been invisible all along. Not because she lacked children, but because no one, not even the man who swore to love her, had ever truly looked at her and said, you are enough, exactly as you are. And so, in the stillness of Elmhaven, where every cobblestone whispered timelines, that silence, she soon realized, was worse than disappointment. It was surrender. And then came the evening that cracked everything open. It was a Tuesday. Rain had returned, softer this time, tapping like hesitant fingers on the roof. Clara sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her, staring at the pregnancy test she'd taken that morning. One line. Again. She hadn't cried. Not yet. She just wrapped it in tissue and tucked it into the trash beneath coffee grounds and orange peels, as if burying it would make it disappear. Rodrigo walked in just after 8, his coat damp, his expression unreadable. He didn't greet her, didn't kiss her cheek like he used to, even in the coldest stretches of their marriage. He just stood in the doorway, watching her with eyes that had lost their warmth. You took another test, he said. Not a question. She nodded, fingers tightening around the mug, and her voice came out small, frayed at the edges. Negative. He exhaled sharply through his nose, the sound like a door slamming shut. He walked to the sink, poured himself a glass of water, drank it in 3 long swallows. Then he turned to her, his shoulders rigid. How many more times are we going to do this? Clara, how many more months of hope, of planning, of pretending this is going to change? I'm not pretending, she whispered. I'm trying. Trying. His voice rose, not with anger, but with a terrible, aching weariness. You've been trying for 3 years. 3 years of shots, of charts, of you lying there like you're waiting for a miracle to fall from the sky. And what do we have to show for it? Nothing. Nothing. She flinched as if struck. Do you think I don't feel that every single day? Do you think I don't wake up wondering what's wrong with me? Maybe there is something wrong, he said, and the words didn't roar. They dripped, slow and icy, like water from a broken faucet. Maybe your body just isn't built for this. Her breath stopped. The room tilted. He stepped closer, his voice dropping, almost gentle now, more devastating because of it. I didn't marry you to be alone forever, Clara. I married you because I thought we'd build something real. Family. Not this. This, she echoed, her voice trembling. What is this? He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not frustration, but grief. His grief. And in that moment, she understood he wasn't mourning the loss of a dream. He was mourning the loss of her, as the woman he'd imagined her to be. You're kind, he said quietly. Smart, beautiful even, but if you can't give me children, what are you? Really, the words struck like a blade between her ribs. Not because they were cruel, but because they came from the man who once held her hair back when she was sick, who kissed her forehead on their wedding night, who whispered forever like it was a promise he believed in. Now, forever had a condition. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady. You think I'm useless? He didn't answer right away. Just looked down at his hands, as if searching for a truth he didn't want to find. And then, softly, finally, if you can't give me kids, then yes. What good are you to me? The rain outside fell harder. Clara didn't shout, didn't cry. She simply turned and walked out of the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. She climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, and entered the room they'd once painted together, the nursery. She ran her palm over the smooth yellow wall, remembering how they'd laughed when Rodrigo got paint in his hair. Now the crib stood empty. The mobile hung still, its pastel stars frozen in place. She sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, and finally let the tears come. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, silent sobs that shook her from the inside out. Not because she'd failed, but because the man she loved had just told her, in the gentlest possible way, that she was nothing without a child in her arms. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, something in Clara began to harden. Not bitterness, not rage, but resolve. Because if she was nothing to him, then maybe it was time she became everything to herself. And as the storm rolled in, wrapping the house in thunder and shadow, Clara made a silent vow. Not to him, not to God, but to the woman she still hadn't met. The one who might still be worth something, even if she never carried a child in her womb. But Clara didn't crumble. She woke the morning after his words with red eyes and a hollow chest. Yes, but also with something new humming beneath her skin. Not hope, not yet, but clarity. She stood in front of the mirror that morning, still in her nightgown, her reflection pale and tired. She traced the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the faint shadows beneath her eyes. You are not nothing, she whispered. The words felt foreign on her tongue, like a language she was just learning to speak. At breakfast, Rodrigo sat across from her, reading the news on his tablet, steam curling from his coffee. He didn't look up when she entered. She poured her own cup, black, no sugar, and sat. Silence pooled between them like standing water. Finally, she spoke, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I heard about a support group for women like me. He glanced up, eyebrows raised, as if surprised she'd spoken at all. Like you, women who can't conceive, she said, meeting his gaze. Women who were told they weren't enough. He set his tablet down slowly. And you going to cry together over herbal tea and old dreams? She didn't flinch. Maybe. Or maybe I'll learn that my worth isn't tied to a test strip or a womb. For the first time in weeks, something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. You think talking to strangers will fix this? I don't need fixing, she said softly. I just need to remember who I am. He stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose and looked away. Do what you want, Clara. That was all. No argument. No plea. Just permission, as if she were a guest in her own life. But that afternoon, she walked into the community center with her heart hammering against her ribs. The room was small, filled with mismatched chairs and the scent of lavender from a diffuser in the corner. 7 women sat in a circle, some young, some older, all carrying that same quiet ache in their posture. A woman named Elena, with silver-streaked hair and calm eyes, smiled gently as Clara took a seat. First time, Clara nodded, throat tight. We don't fix here, Elena said, as if reading her mind. We witness. We say the things we've been told never to say out loud. And then, one by one, they spoke. A teacher who'd lost 3 pregnancies. A nurse whose husband left her after 2 years of IVF. A writer who chose career over children, then found herself grieving a choice she wasn't sure was hers to make. Their stories weren't neat. They were messy, raw, full of anger and shame and longing, but also strength. When it was Clara's turn, her voice shook. My husband told me I was useless if I couldn't give him kids. The words hung in the air, sharp and exposed. No one gasped. No one judged. Instead, Elena leaned forward. And what did you tell him? I didn't tell him anything, Clara admitted. But last night, I told myself something. What was that? She took a breath. That I'm still here. That I still breathe, love, dream. Even if I never hold a child of my own. That maybe I'm enough just as I am. A few women nodded. One wiped her eyes. Later, walking home under a sky streaked with lavender and gold, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not a healing, not yet, but an opening. Like a door long locked had finally creaked ajar. That night, Rodrigo found her on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching fireflies blink in the garden. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. You went to that meeting. She didn't look at him. Yes. Did it help? She turned then, her eyes catching the last light of day. It reminded me I'm not broken, just different. He shifted uncomfortably. I never said you were broken. You said I was useless, she said gently. That's worse. He flinched, looked down at his hands. I was angry, disappointed. I didn't mean... You meant it in that moment, she interrupted, not with accusation, but with quiet certainty. And that's okay. But I can't live my life waiting for you to change your mind about me. He was silent for so long she thought he might leave. But then, softly, what are you going to do? She looked out at the garden. The roses still wilted, but new shoots pushing through the soil. I'm going to find out who I am, without you defining me. Inside the house, the nursery door remained closed. But outside, under a sky full of stars she hadn't noticed in years, Clara finally began to breathe again. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief and the silence, a question began to form. They still shared meals, still slept under the same roof, but the space between them had grown teeth. One morning, as Clara packed a thermos of tea and a notebook into her tote bag, she'd started attending a writing workshop at the library. Rodrigo lingered in the hallway, watching her with that detached curiosity one might give a stranger rearranging furniture in their home. You're leaving early again, he said. She zipped the bag, not looking up. The workshop starts at 7. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You used to hate mornings. I used to hate a lot of things I thought I had to endure, she said softly, finally meeting his eyes. Now I'm learning what I actually love. He didn't respond right away, just studied her. The way her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, the faint smudge of ink on her thumb, the quiet certainty in her posture that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Do you even want to fix this? He asked suddenly, voice low, almost raw. Clara paused, not out of hesitation but out of respect for the question. Fix what, Rodrigo, the marriage or the fact that I can't give you children? He looked away, jaw tightening. Both. She stepped closer, not to embrace him, but to be seen. You didn't marry a womb. You married me. And if the only version of me you can love is the one carrying your child, then maybe there's nothing to fix. Maybe there's just letting go. His eyes flickered. Pain, confusion, maybe even fear. So that's it, you're just walking away. I'm not walking away, she said, voice trembling only slightly. I'm standing still, for the first time in years. And you're the one who left, long before you ever slept in the guest room. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he had no rehearsed reply, no logic to shield him. That evening, Clara found a single envelope on the kitchen table after he'd gone to bed. No note, just her name written in his careful script. Inside was a folded letter from the adoption agency, one she'd requested weeks ago but never opened, too afraid of what hope might cost her. Her hands shook as she held it. She didn't open it that night. Instead, she placed it on the shelf above the fireplace, the same shelf where their wedding photo used to sit. She'd moved it last week, not out of anger, out of necessity. Days turned into a strange rhythm. They coexisted like planets in the same orbit, close enough to feel each other's gravity, too far to touch. Rodrigo began leaving groceries she liked, lavender honey, oat milk, dark chocolate, without mentioning it. Clara started brewing his favorite coffee in the morning, even though he never thanked her. These were not gestures of reconciliation. They were silent acknowledgments. I still see you, even if I don't know how to stay. Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed the windows, wind howling through the eaves like a voice long buried. Clara sat on the living room floor, the adoption letter finally open in her lap, its words blurring through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Footsteps. Rodrigo stood in the doorway, hair damp, eyes shadowed. You're considering it, he said. Not a question. She didn't hide the letter. 3 siblings, newborns, brothers and a sister. Their mother couldn't care for them. They need a home. He stepped inside, slow, as if approaching something fragile. Adoption. It's not the same. Her head snapped up. Why? Because they don't carry your blood, he flinched. Because it's not natural. Love isn't about DNA, Rodrigo, she said, voice rising for the first time in months. It's about showing up. Every damn day. Even when it's hard. Even when they're not yours by accident of biology. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she saw not dismissal but doubt. In himself. What if I can't love them, he whispered. Then don't, she said, softer now. But don't stand in the way of someone who can. Silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. He turned to leave, then stopped. Would you do it alone? She met his gaze steady. If I have to, yes. He nodded once, slowly, and walked out. Clara stayed on the floor long after the storm passed, the letter pressed against her chest like a heartbeat. The marriage hadn't ended with a bang, nor with a signed paper. It ended in the space between 2 people who still shared a name but no longer shared a vision. And in that quiet unraveling, Clara found something unexpected. Not freedom. Not yet. But the courage to imagine a future that didn't require his permission. Outside, the clouds parted. She sat at the kitchen table one Tuesday morning, the adoption agency's packet spread before her like a map to a country she'd never dared to name. Forms, background checks, home study questionnaires, each page a threshold. Her hands trembled as she filled in her name, her address. The line that asked, why do you want to be a parent? She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote, because love isn't earned through biology. It's chosen. Every day. A knock at the door startled her. It was Elena from the support group, holding a steaming thermos and a folder marked, First Steps. You didn't answer my texts, Elena said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. I figured you were either dead or finally doing something brave. Clara laughed. A real laugh, surprising even herself. Maybe both. Elena poured 2 cups of tea. The agency called me, said, you submitted your preliminary application. Clara nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. I did. Last night. After everything. And Rodrigo, he doesn't object, Clara said carefully. But he doesn't support it either. He just steps aside. Elena studied her over the rim of her cup. You're not doing this to prove him wrong, are you? No, Clara said, and meant it. I'm doing this because for the first time, I believe I have something to give. Not because I need to be needed, but because I want to love someone who has no one. Elena reached across the table, squeezed her hand. Then you're already a mother. The words settled deep, like a seed finding soil. That afternoon, Clara enrolled in a parenting course offered by the County Foundations of Foster and Adoptive Care. The first session was held in a sunlit room at the community center. Chairs arranged in a circle, walls lined with posters about attachment, trauma, and resilience. Clara sat near the back, heart pounding as the instructor. A warm-eyed woman named Marla welcomed everyone. Most of you are here because you've been told you can't have children, Marla began. But today, I want you to hear this: biology doesn't make a parent. Presence does. Patience does. Showing up when it's hard, that's what makes a family. Clara's eyes stung. Later, during introductions, a man in his 50s with a gentle voice said, I lost my wife last year. We always talked about adopting. Now I'm doing it alone. Because love shouldn't wait for permission. A young couple, hands clasped tightly, shared they'd tried IVF for 6 years. We're done fighting our bodies, the woman said. Now we're ready to open our hearts. When it was Clara's turn, she took a breath. I was told I was useless if I couldn't give my husband children, so I believed it for a long time. But now, I think maybe I was meant to be someone else's chance. Silence followed. Not awkward, but sacred. That evening, as she walked home beneath a sky flushed pink with dusk, her phone buzzed. A message from the agency home study coordinator assigned. First visit scheduled for Thursday. Her knees nearly gave out. She sat on the porch steps, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Inside the house, Rodrigo moved quietly through the rooms, a ghost in his own life. He hadn't asked about the course, hadn't mentioned the forms piling on her desk. But she'd noticed him watching her sometimes, when she read parenting books late at night, when she hummed while folding tiny secondhand onesies she'd bought on impulse. He didn't understand, but he wasn't stopping her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. That night, Clara dreamed of 3 small faces, round cheeks, wide eyes, hands reaching. She didn't know their names yet, didn't know if they'd ever call her Mom. But in the dream, she held them, one in each arm, the third curled against her chest. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. She felt full. When she woke, dawn was breaking. She walked to the nursery, still empty, still yellow, and opened the window. Fresh air poured in, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs. She didn't repaint the walls, didn't buy a crib yet, but she swept the floor, dusted the shelves, placed a single stuffed bear on the windowsill, a lion soft and brave. And as sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, Clara whispered, so softly only the walls could hear, I'm ready. Outside, birds sang. Inside, a new kind of waiting began, not the kind that shrinks you, but the kind that grows you. Because this time, she wasn't waiting for a miracle to happen to her. She was becoming the miracle for someone else. And somewhere, in a hospital not far away, 3 tiny hearts beat in unison, unaware that their world was about to change. Unaware that a woman who'd once been told she was useless was about to, following your successful home study and completion of required training, you have been matched with 3 infant siblings currently in emergency foster care. Placement may proceed pending final approval. Social worker to contact within 48 hours. She read it 3 times, then pressed it to her chest and sank to the floor, tears streaming silently down her face. Not tears of joy, not yet, but of disbelief, terror, and something dangerously close to hope. Rodrigo found her there an hour later, still on the floor, the letter clutched in her lap like a sacred text. He didn't speak at first, just stood in the doorway, watching her the way one might watch someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "They said yes," she whispered, voice raw. "They're going to let me take them home." He stepped inside slowly, as if afraid the floor might give way. 3 babies. At once. She nodded, looking up at him, really looking. Their brothers and a sister, born 3 weeks ago. Their mother. She couldn't keep them safe. He swallowed hard, eyes flickering with something unreadable. "And you're sure about this? You know what this means? No sleep, no peace, no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything," she said softly. "I don't need sleep. I don't need peace. I just need them to know they're loved." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Clara, I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to," she said gently. "This isn't your path. It's mine." He spun back, frustration flashing in his eyes. "But we're still married. What am I supposed to do? Pretend this is normal, that I'm okay with raising someone else's children as if they're mine?" "I'm not asking you to pretend," she said, standing now, her voice steady, despite the storm inside her. "I'm asking you to decide, are you staying because you love me, or only the version of me you thought would give you heirs?" He flinched as if struck. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. Car passed. The ordinary world kept turning, oblivious to the earthquake happening in this kitchen. Finally, he exhaled. "I need time. Time for what?" she asked, not unkindly. "To decide if I'm worth loving without a womb full of your blood, because if that's what this is, then don't waste my time. Or yours." He looked at her then, not with anger, but with a dawning sorrow. "You've changed." "Yes," she said. "I had to." That evening, the social worker called. Her name was Naomi, voice calm and steady. "The babies are stable, healthy. The hospital will release them Friday morning, if you're ready." Clara's breath caught. "Friday, yes. We'll need you here by 8. Bring car seats, bottles, blankets, and an open heart." After she hung up, Clara stood in the nursery, the room she'd swept, dusted, and filled with secondhand cribs borrowed from Elena's church group. She ran her fingers over the lion plushie on the sill, then walked to the closet where tiny clothes hung in neat rose onesies with stars, socks with ducks, a pale blue blanket stitched with the words, "You are loved." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on the floor, folding and refolding diapers, rehearsing lullabies under her breath, her mind racing with fears. What if I drop one? What if they cry? And I can't soothe them? What if I'm not enough? But then she remembered Elena's words. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up." By dawn, she was dressed, hair pulled back, eyes red but clear. She brewed coffee, just 1 cup, and left a note on the counter for Rodrigo. "I'll be back with them by noon. You don't have to be here, but if you are, come as yourself. Not as the man who needed a legacy, just as you." She drove to the hospital in silence, windows down, spring air rushing past her face like a promise. In the parking lot, she paused, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. This is it, she thought. No turning back, no safety net, just 3 tiny lives and one woman who'd been told she was useless. Now stepping into the fire anyway. Because sometimes the most powerful kind of love isn't the kind that comes easily. It's the kind you choose when everyone, including yourself, doubts you can. And as she walked through the hospital doors, heart pounding like a drum, Clara Naomi, the social worker, stood just inside, smiling gently. "They've been waiting for you." Clara's breath hitched. They're really mine. For now," Naomi said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Foster to adopt. But if all goes well, and I have no doubt it will, this placement can become permanent." Clara stepped inside. The silence in the room was thick with possibility. She approached the bassinet slowly, as if afraid her presence might shatter the moment. One baby stirred, a boy, with dark wisps of hair and fingers curled like petals. Another, the girl, sighed in her sleep, her lashes fluttering. The third, another boy, sucked gently on his fist, his chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. "Oh," Clara whispered, the word cracking like thin ice. "Oh, my darlings." She reached in, heart hammering, and lifted the girl first. So small, so warm. The baby nestled into her chest with a soft coo, as if she'd known Clara all along. Tears spilled freely now, hot and silent, tracking down her cheeks. She wasn't just holding a child. She was holding a second chance. For herself, for them, for the broken idea of family she'd carried for so long. Naomi guided her through the final paperwork, showed her how to secure each baby into their car seats. 3 of them, lined up in the back like a constellation. "Remember," she said, "this first week is about bonding, not perfection. Feed them, hold them, let them hear your voice. That's all they need." Clara nodded, hands trembling as she buckled the last strap. Driving home felt like floating. Every stoplight, every turn. She glanced in the rearview mirror. 3 faces, 3 futures, all sleeping peacefully in her care. When she pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. Not just a shelter, but a sanctuary waiting to be filled. She carried them inside one by one, whispering nonsense words and lullabies, her arms aching but her soul lighter than it had been in years. She laid them in the nursery, changed their diapers with clumsy tenderness, offered bottles she'd pre-warmed with shaking hands. The girl latched on first, eyes locking onto Clara's with startling intensity. In that gaze, Clara saw no judgment, no expectation, only trust. And then, as dusk settled over Elmhaven, Rodrigo walked through the front door. He froze in the hallway. From the nursery doorway, Clara watched him take in the scene bottles on the counter, baby blankets draped over chairs, the soft murmur of her voice as she rocked the smallest boy. He didn't speak, just stood there, shoulders tense, eyes wide. Clara stepped out, careful not to wake the baby in her arms. "You're home." He nodded slowly, gaze flicking to the nursery. "They're here." "Yes." He swallowed hard. All three. A long silence stretched between them, charged with everything unsaid. Then quietly, "Can I see them?" Her breath caught. She hadn't expected this, hadn't dared hope. She stepped aside. Rodrigo walked into the nursery like a man entering a cathedral. He stood over the crib, where the 2 boys slept, side by side, their breathing synchronized. His hand hovered above them, as if afraid to touch. Then, slowly, he brushed a fingertip over the cheek of the older boy, the one with dark hair. "He looks like you," Clara said softly. Rodrigo's eyes filled. "He doesn't." "No," she agreed, "but he could, if you let him." He turned to her then, voice rough with emotion. "I don't know how to be this. A father to children who aren't mine. You start by being here," she said, "by choosing them, every day." He looked back at the babies, then at Clara, really looked, and for the first time in months, she saw not resignation but wonder. "You did this," he murmured. "You brought them home." "I did," she said, "but they're not just mine. They're ours, if you want them to be." He didn't answer right away, just stood there, watching the rise and fall of their tiny chests, as if witnessing something holy. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside that yellow-walled room, time slowed, and a new kind of family began to breathe. Clara didn't know what came next, but as Rodrigo reached out, this time with his whole hand, and gently took the sleeping boy into his arms. Awkward, reverent, terrified. She knew one thing for certain: the man who once called her useless had just been handed a miracle. New York of hunger and confusion that filled the house like a storm with no eye. At 3:17 a.m., the girl Lena, Clara had already started calling her in her head, woke with a cry so sharp it cut through the fog in Clara's mind like glass. She scooped her up, whispering nonsense words, pacing the hallway in bare feet, her back screaming in protest. The boys, Mateo and Eli, slept fitfully in the crib, their breaths shallow and uneven. Rodrigo appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, wearing an old t-shirt Clara hadn't seen in years. "Let me take her," he said, voice rough with sleep or something else. She hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he said, "but I want to." She handed Lena over carefully, showing him how to cradle her head, how to hold her close to his chest. He moved stiffly at first, like a man handling something priceless and fragile. But then Lena let out a soft sigh, her tiny fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, and something in Rodrigo's posture softened. "She's warm," he murmured, almost to himself. Clara nodded, watching them. "They all are, even when they cry." He looked up at her, eyes glistening in the dim hallway light. "How do you do this hour after hour?" "I don't think," she said, voice raw. "I just respond." He rocked Lena slowly, his movements gaining confidence. "I used to think love was something you earned, through blood, through legacy, but she doesn't care who I am. She just needs me." Clara's throat tightened. "That's the secret, isn't it? Love isn't earned. It's given, freely, even when you're exhausted, even when you're scared." He looked down at Lena again, brushing a thumb over her cheek. "I was so angry for so long. At you, at God, at my body, at yours." He shook his head. "But now, I think I was just afraid. Afraid of never being enough for anyone." "You're enough for her," Clara whispered. He nodded, but didn't speak, just kept rocking. By dawn, all three were feeding. 2 in Clara's arms, 1 in Rodrigo's, a strange, beautiful tableau of chaos and tenderness. Sunlight spilled through the nursery window, painting golden stripes across the floor, catching the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. Later that morning, as Clara washed bottles at the sink, Rodrigo stood beside her, folding tiny socks with surprising care. "I called my mother," he said suddenly. Clara turned, surprised. "You did?" she cried. He said, a small, almost disbelieving smile tugging at his lips. "Said she's been praying for grandchildren for years, and never cared how they came, only that they were loved." Clara's eyes welled. "She sounds wise." "She is," he said softly. Then, after a pause, "I told her their names." Clara froze. "You named them. I hope that's okay," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to overstep." "No," she interrupted, tears spilling over. "It's more than okay." "What did you say?" "Matteo, for my grandfather." "Eli, because it means my God." "And Lena," he looked at her, "because it sounds like light." She covered her mouth with her hand, unable to speak. In that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but inside the very walls of the house. The nursery wasn't just a room anymore. It was a heart, and it was finally beating. That afternoon, during a rare lull, Clara sat on the porch with Lena asleep against her chest. Watching Rodrigo push Eli and Matteo in a double stroller he'd assembled at 2 a.m., muttering instructions under his breath. He looked exhausted, unshaven, but also alive. Elena called later. "How's the chaos?" "Beautiful," Clara said, voice thick with emotion. "Utterly, terrifyingly beautiful." "And Rodrigo," she glanced through the window. He was on the floor now, both boys on his chest, their tiny hands patting his face as he made soft, ridiculous noises just to hear them giggle. "He's learning," she said. "We both are." That night, as they took turns walking the hallways, bottles in hand, lullabies on lips, Clara realized something. This wasn't the family she dreamed of. It was messier, louder, more uncertain, but it was real, and it was theirs. And when Rodrigo passed her in the dark hallway, their shoulders brushing, and whispered, "You were never useless, Clara. I was just too blind to see your worth." She didn't reply with words. She just leaned into him, just for a second, letting the warmth of his presence, the weight of his regret, the promise in his voice sink into her bones. Outside, the world slept. Inside, 3 hearts beat against 2 weary chests. And for the first time in a long time, she'd started taking the babies to the park in the late afternoons, when the sun dipped low and the air turned golden. It was their time, hers and theirs. She'd spread a quilt beneath the old oak at the edge of Willow Square, the one with roots that curled like gentle fingers into the earth. There, she'd lay the triplets on their backs, letting them bat at dangling toys while she watched clouds drift and tried to remember how to breathe without counting seconds. That day was no different until it was. She was adjusting Lena's sun hat, her back to the path, when a voice behind her froze the blood in her veins. Clara, she turned slowly. Rodrigo, her Rodrigo, the one who now sang off-key nursery rhymes and knew which pacifier each baby preferred, wasn't the one who spoke. It was him, Daniel, her ex from college. A friendly face from another life. He stood a few feet away, holding the hand of a little boy with sandy hair and curious eyes. He looked older, softer around the edges, but his smile was the same, warm, familiar, disarming. "Wow," he said, eyes wide as they landed on the triplets. "I didn't know you had kids." Clara's pulse spiked, not with fear, but with a strange, prickling dread. "These are mine," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Adopted." Daniel crouched down, smiling at the babies. "Triplets, that's incredible. You must be exhausted." "I am," she admitted, "but happy." He stood, still smiling, but his gaze drifted past her, deeper into the park, where a familiar figure stood frozen on the pathway. Rodrigo. He'd come to bring her a bottle she'd forgotten. His arms full of baby gear, his expression relaxed, until he saw Daniel. Now his posture had gone rigid. His eyes locked onto Clara, then flicked to the man beside her, then back again. In that instant, Clara saw it. The old wound reopening, the fear that she'd been replaced, the suspicion that she'd moved on, the quiet terror that he'd lost her not to another man, but to a life he hadn't been ready for. Daniel followed her gaze. "Oh, hey, is that your husband?" Clara swallowed. "Yes." Daniel waved. Rodrigo didn't return it. He just stood there, jaw tight, eyes burning with something unspoken. "I should go," Daniel said quickly, sensing the shift. "Just wow, Clara. You look great. Really." He squeezed her shoulder gently, just a friend's gesture, and walked away, his son skipping beside him. Silence fell like a curtain. Clara turned back to the babies, her hands trembling as she smoothed Lena's blanket. She didn't look at Rodrigo, couldn't, but then his shadow fell over her. He didn't speak at first, just set the forgotten bottle on the quilt and crouched beside her. His presence heavy, warm, uncertain. "That was Daniel," he finally said. "Yes. You never told me you kept in touch." "I didn't," she said softly. "I haven't seen him in 8 years. He just recognized me." Rodrigo nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the triplets, on Mateo, who reached for him with a gurgle. Without thinking, Rodrigo lifted him into his arms, holding him close, as if grounding himself. "I thought," he trailed off, voice rough, "when I saw him with you, I thought maybe you'd finally found someone who didn't need you to be perfect. Someone who didn't break you." Clara turned to him then, tears welling. "Rodrigo, I'm not with him. I'm here. With you. With them." He looked at her, really looked, and she saw the vulnerability beneath the silence. The man who'd called her useless, now terrified of being the one who wasn't enough. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just, seeing you like that, happy, whole, surrounded by light, I panicked, because I know I don't deserve it. Not after what I said." She reached out, touching his arm. "You don't have to deserve love. You just have to accept it." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch for just a second. Then, voice barely audible, "What if I mess this up? What if I hurt you? Or them? Again?" "You won't," she said firmly, "because you're not the same man who said those words. You're the one who changes diapers at 4 a.m. You're the one who sings to Eli when he's scared. You're the one who stayed." He exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead gently against Mateo's. "I was so blind, Clara. I thought family was something you inherited. But it's something you build, brick by brick, cry by cry, and you built it even when I walked away." She didn't answer, just leaned her shoulder against his, their sides touching, the triplets between them like a bridge. And in that moment, beneath the rustling leaves and the endless sky, Clara realized the truth. Rodrigo hadn't just seen her with the triplets. He'd finally seen her, not as a vessel, not as a failure, But as a woman who had turned pain into purpose, silence into song, and brokenness into a home, he didn't leave. He didn't run. He just held their son a little tighter and whispered, so softly only she could hear. She noticed it first in the grocery store. A woman at the checkout lane glanced at the triplets in the cart, then at Clara, and said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Oh, are they all yours?" The emphasis on all hung in the air like a question mark made of ice. Then at the pediatrician's office, a nurse asked, "Biological," without looking up from the chart. When Clara said, "Adopted," the woman's smile tightened. "Oh, that's noble. Noble." As if love were charity, not choice. But it was the quiet moments that cut deepest. The way neighbors would coo over the babies, then turn to Rodrigo and say, "You must be so proud." As if Clara were merely the vessel that brought them here, not the heart that kept them alive. And then, one afternoon, she saw him. She was pushing the stroller down Elm Street, heading home after a rare coffee break. Just 10 minutes alone with a lukewarm latte and the ghost of silence. The triplets were dozing, lulled by the rhythm of wheels on pavement. Sunlight dappled through the trees. Everything felt soft, safe, until she turned the corner and froze. There, on the bench outside the post office, sat her husband, her Rodrigo, talking to a woman Clara didn't recognize. She was elegant, mid-30s, blonde, holding a toddler on her lap. Rodrigo was leaning forward, animated, smiling in a way Clara hadn't seen in years. Not the tired, tender smile he gave the babies, but the easy, confident grin of the man he'd been before grief and disappointment hollowed him out. Her breath stopped. The stroller wheels squeaked softly as she slowed. She didn't hide, didn't turn away. She just stood there, heart hammering against her ribs, watching. The woman laughed at something Rodrigo said, touching his arm briefly. He didn't pull away. Clara's hands went cold. Not because she thought he was unfaithful. She knew him better than that. But because in that moment, she saw herself through his eyes, exhausted, frayed, buried under bottles and burp cloths. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. And this woman, polished, calm, together. She looked like the future he might have chosen if fate hadn't handed him 3 crying infants and a wife who couldn't give him blood. She wanted to walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen. But then Eli stirred in the stroller, letting out a soft whimper. Rodrigo's head snapped up. His eyes met hers, and everything in his expression changed. The ease vanished. The smile dropped. He stood so fast the woman startled. "Clara," he said, voice sharp with alarm. She didn't speak, just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, feeling suddenly invisible. He hurried over, leaving the woman blinking in confusion. "What are you doing here? I didn't know you were coming this way." "I didn't know you'd be here either," she said quietly. He glanced back at the woman, then lowered his voice. "That's Sarah, from work. Her husband left her last year. She's struggling. I was just helping." Clara finished, voice brittle. "Like you're helping me," he flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" She looked down at the babies. Lena, awake now, gazing up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "Do I look like I need help more than she does? Clara, please." "You told me once I was useless if I didn't give you kids," she said, voice trembling but clear. "Now I've given you 3, and still, I wonder if I'll ever be enough compared to the woman you could have had." His face crumpled. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" she whispered. "Because from here it looks like you missed the life you thought you'd have. The quiet life. The simple wife. The one who didn't come with complications." He reached for her hand, but she didn't pull away. Didn't give him the satisfaction of resistance. She just let him hold it, her skin cold against his warmth. "Clara," he said, voice raw, eyes glistening. "I don't miss that life. I grieve that I ever wanted it. Every time I look at Lena's smile, or hear Mateo laugh, or hold Eli when he's scared, I realize how small my vision was. How cruel." He squeezed her hand. "Sarah's just a colleague. But you're my home. Even when I don't deserve you. Even when I forget to show it." She searched his eyes. So familiar, so full of regret and something else. Devotion. And what if one day you wake up and realize you made a mistake? She asked, voice breaking. That you traded the life you wanted for one you just tolerated. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I wake up every morning grateful that my mistake is the best thing that ever happened to me. She didn't cry, not yet, but something inside her unclenched. A knot she hadn't known was there. He gently took the stroller handle from her. Let's go home. As they walked, side by side, he didn't let go of her hand. Behind them, Sarah watched them go, her expression unreadable. But Clara still carried the ache, the quiet doubt that no amount of changed diapers or midnight lullabies could fully erase. Then, on a rain-slicked Thursday evening, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Rodrigo standing on the porch. Not coming home, but arriving, as if he'd walked from somewhere far away. His coat was damp, his hair windswept, and in his hands he held a small, wrapped box. I didn't come to stay, he said before she could speak. I came to say something. She stepped aside silently, heart pounding. He walked into the living room, where the triplets were napping in their bouncers, soft music playing from a speaker in the corner. He set the box on the coffee table, then turned to her. I went to see my father today, he said. Clara blinked. Your dad, I didn't know you spoke to him. I didn't. Not really. Not since Mom died. He took a breath. But I needed to ask him something. She waited, arms crossed, as if holding herself together. I asked him if he ever regretted having me. His voice cracked. Not because of anything I did, but because I wasn't the son he imagined. I was quiet, sensitive. I cried at movies. He wanted a hunter, a businessman, someone strong like his father. Clara's breath caught. What did he say? Rodrigo's eyes filled. He said, I didn't get the son I expected, but I got the one I needed. He looked at her, tears spilling over. And that's how I feel about them, about us. I didn't get the family I planned, but I got the one that saved me. He picked up the box and held it out. Open it. Her hands trembled as she untied the ribbon. Inside, nestled in velvet, was not a ring, but a silver locket. She opened it. On one side, a tiny photo of the triplets, taken just last week, their faces pressed together in sleep. On the other, a handwritten note in Rodrigo's careful script. You were never useless. You were always enough. She looked up, tears streaming. Why now? Because I need you to know, he said, voice raw, that I don't just love them despite not being mine by blood. I love them because you chose them, and I love you, not for what you gave me, but for who you became when everything tried to break you. He stepped closer, but didn't touch her. I know I don't deserve your trust, not after what I said, but I'm asking for a chance to earn it, not as your husband, not yet, just as a man who finally sees you. Clara looked at the locket, then at the babies. Lena stirring, blinking up at her with sleepy eyes. She thought of the nights she'd cried in silence, the mornings she'd wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, the moments she'd feared she'd wake up and find this all gone. And then she thought of Rodrigo, standing in the rain, carrying not excuses, but truth. She closed the locket, pressed it to her chest. You don't have to earn my love, Rodrigo. You never did. He let out a shuddering breath. Then what do I do? You stay, she said softly. Not because you have to, but because you want to. He nodded, tears falling freely now. I want to. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. Inside, the triplets slept, unaware that the man who once measured their mother's worth by her womb had just knelt. Not in surrender, but in devotion. And Clara, she finally let herself believe that love wasn't something you proved. It was something you lived, day after day, choice after choice, heartbreak after heartbreak, until it became something unshakable. She didn't put the locket on right away. She held it. Life with triplets didn't pause for healing. It surged forward like a river after rain. Relentless, beautiful, chaotic. There were still nights when all three cried at once, when Rodrigo stumbled and exhausted from work only to find bottles spilled and laundry piled high. when Clara stared into the mirror and wondered if the woman looking back was still the one who once dreamed of quiet evenings and slow Sunday mornings. But now something had shifted. One evening, as she rocked Eli through a fever, Rodrigo sat on the floor beside her, gently rubbing Mateo's back while Lena napped against his chest. The house was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the nightlight in the nursery. "I called the agency today," Clara said quietly, not looking up. Rodrigo tensed. "About the adoption finalization," she nodded. "They said the birth mother hasn't contested. If we file by next month, the hearing could be in 60 days. He was silent for a long moment. Then, softly, "You're sure you want me on the papers legally?" As their father, she finally looked at him. "Do you want to be?" His eyes filled. "More than anything. But I don't want you to say yes out of obligation. Or pity." "I'm not saying yes," she said, voice steady. "I'm saying of course." He let out a breath he'd been holding for months. "What if I fail them?" "You already haven't," she said. "Every time you've shown up, even when you were scared, you've been their father." He leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. "I used to think fatherhood was about blood, legacy, name. Now I know it's about showing up when it's hard, staying when you want to run, loving someone who didn't ask to be born into your mess." Clara reached out, resting her free hand on his knee. "You're not their mess, Rodrigo. You're their safe place." Outside, thunder rumbled, summer storms rolling in early. Later that night, after the fever broke and all three were finally asleep, Clara stood at the kitchen sink, washing bottles, her body aching, her mind racing. Rodrigo came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm terrified," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "What if the court says no? What if someone decides I'm not stable enough? What if they take them back? After we've loved them this much?" He turned her gently to face him. "Then we fight. Together. But Clara, they're not going anywhere. Not because of paperwork. Because they're ours. In every way that matters." She buried her face in his chest, finally letting the fear out in silent sobs. He held her without a word, just breathing with her, anchoring her. The next morning, the mail brought another envelope, this one from the adoption agency. Final documents, signatures required, a checklist of next steps. Clara sat at the table, pen in hand, staring at the line that read "Legal Parents," her name, and his. She looked up. Rodrigo stood in the doorway, holding Mateo, who babbled happily, tiny fingers tugging at his shirt. "Ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I was born ready." She signed her name, Clara Marie Reyes, slowly, deliberately, then slid the paper toward him. Rodrigo set Mateo in his bouncer, kissed the top of his head, and picked up the pen. His hand didn't shake. He wrote his name with quiet certainty, as if etching a promise into stone. When he finished, he looked at her. "It's done." "No," she said, a small, fierce smile tugging at her lips. "It's just beginning." That afternoon, a call came from the social worker. "There's been a development," Naomi said, voice cautious. "The birth grandmother, she's requested a meeting. She wants to see them. Just once." Clara's stomach dropped. "Is that allowed?" "It is. And it's your choice." Rodrigo, who'd been listening, stepped closer. "We'll go," he said firmly. "But we set the terms. They meet our children, not their past." Clara nodded, heart pounding, because she knew this wasn't just about legal rights. It was about identity, about belonging, about proving once and for all that love didn't need permission to be real. That night, as she tucked the triplets into their cribs, Lena clutching a tiny bear, Eli sucking his thumb, Mateo already snoring, she whispered, "No one is taking you from me. Not courts, not ghosts, not fear." And for the first time, she believed it. Outside, the storm had passed. Stars blinked through clear skies. And inside, 3 small hearts beat in rhythm with 2 weary, hopeful ones back. The babies slept in their car seats. Wrapped in blankets Clara had stitched herself, each embroidered with their name in tiny blue thread. "You don't have to do this," he said suddenly, voice tight. "I do," she replied, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Not for her. For them. So one day, if they ask, they'll know we weren't afraid of their truth." The agency waiting room was quiet, sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. Naomi greeted them with a warm but solemn nod. "She's already here, nervous, crying on and off since this morning." Clara's stomach twisted. "Is she stable?" "She's clean. 6 months sober. She's been asking about them since day one, but the court wouldn't allow contact. Today's her first chance." Before Clara could respond, the door to the inner office opened. And there she was, young, too young, maybe 23, with tired eyes and hands that trembled at her sides. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes plain, but her gaze, when it landed on the triplets, shattered like glass. "Oh," she whispered, voice breaking. "Oh, my babies." Clara's breath caught, not in anger but in grief, for the life this girl lost, for the children who would never know the warmth of her arms beyond this moment, for the cruel tangle of love and failure that brought them all here. Rodrigo stepped slightly in front of the stroller, not as a shield, but as a presence, calm, grounded. The young woman, Maya, Naomi had said her name was, didn't approach, just stood there, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "I don't want to take them," she said suddenly, voice raw. "I just needed to see if they were okay." Clara nodded slowly, heart pounding. "They are." Maya's eyes flicked to her. "You're the one who took them in." "I am." Do you love them?" Clara didn't hesitate. "With everything I am." Maya let out a shuddering breath. Then, to everyone's surprise, she looked at Rodrigo. "And you're their dad?" He swallowed hard. "I'm trying to be." She studied him, the sincerity in his eyes, the way his hand rested protectively on the stroller handle. And then, something miraculous happened. She smiled, just a flicker, but real. "They're lucky to have you." Naomi gently guided her to a chair. "You can hold one if you'd like. Just one. For a few minutes." Maya nodded, wiping her eyes. "Lena. I want to hold Lena." Clara exchanged a glance with Rodrigo. He gave a small nod. Carefully, Clara lifted Lena from her seat and walked over. Maya's hands shook as she reached for her, but when the baby was placed in her arms, she stilled, like a storm settling into calm. "She has my nose?" Maya whispered, tracing Lena's profile with a trembling finger. "And his eyes." She looked up, tears welling again. "I named her Lena because it means light. I hoped, even if I couldn't keep her, she'd bring light to someone else's life." Clara's throat tightened. "She does. Every day." Maya held her close, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and milk. "I was so scared you'd hate me, that you'd tell them I abandoned them." "We won't," Rodrigo said quietly. "We'll tell them you loved them enough to let them go." Maya looked at him, shocked. Then, softly, "Thank you." The minutes passed in hushed wonder. Lena cooed, reaching for Maya's face. Maya cried silently, rocking her gently, whispering words too low to hear. Probably prayers or apologies or both. When time was up, Maya didn't fight it. She kissed Lena's forehead, then handed her back to Clara with infinite care. "Will I ever see them again?" she asked, voice small. Clara looked at Rodrigo. He nodded. "We'll send photos," Clara said. "Letters if you want. Not because we have to, but because they're yours too in a way." Maya covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. "You're angels." "No," Clara said gently. "We're just people who got a second chance. Like you." As they walked out, Rodrigo kept one hand on the stroller, the other on Clara's lower back. Steady, warm, sure. In the car, Clara buckled Lena back in, her fingers lingering on the baby's cheek. "She loved them," she murmured. "She still does," Rodrigo said, starting the engine. "And that doesn't threaten us. Completes them." Clara looked at him, really looked. The man who once measured her worth by her womb now honored. The mother who came before him, not out of duty, but out of grace. That night, as they bathed the triplets together, Rodrigo testing the water with his elbow. Clara singing softly. Eli reached out from the tub and grabbed Rodrigo's finger with a wet, gurgling laugh. Rodrigo froze. Then, tears filling his eyes, he laughed too. Deep, genuine, full of wonder. "He knows me," he whispered. "He does," Clara said, smiling through her own tears. "He knows you're his." And in that steam-filled bathroom, with soap bubbles floating in the air and 3 tiny voices babbling in delight, Clara understood family wasn't about erasing the past. It was about weaving it gently, honestly, into a future where love wasn't divided but multiplied. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside, something eternal settled into place. Shook. Rodrigo stood beside her, holding Mateo and Eli in a double carrier, his posture calm, his eyes clear. "You ready?" he asked, voice low. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, she didn't search his face for judgment, for disappointment, for the ghost of the man who once called her useless. She saw only him present, steady, hers. "I was born ready," she said, echoing the words she'd spoken months ago. But now, they didn't feel like defiance. They felt like truth. Inside, the courtroom was small, sunlit, devoid of drama. Just a judge with kind eyes, a caseworker who'd watched them grow into parents, and a stack of papers that would soon bear witness to something far deeper than ink. They sat together on a wooden bench, the triplets nestled between them. Lena dozing against Clara's chest, Mateo babbling at a ceiling fan, Eli clutching Rodrigo's shirt like an anchor. When the judge called their names, they rose together, not as 2 individuals seeking approval, but as a unit forged in sleepless nights, whispered fears, and countless acts of quiet courage. "Mr. and Mrs. Reyes," the judge began, glancing at their file. "Your home study is exemplary, your commitment undeniable. And these children," she looked at the triplets, her expression softening, "they appear deeply attached to you." Clara's throat tightened. "Do you understand that by finalizing this adoption, you assume full and permanent legal responsibility for these children? Through illness, hardship, and all the uncertainties of life." "We do," Rodrigo said, voice firm. "And do you enter this not out of obligation, but out of love?" Clara met the judge's gaze. "We entered it broken, but we stayed because of love. And we'll keep loving them long after this courtroom is just a memory." A faint smile touched the judge's lips. She signed the decree without hesitation. "It is so ordered. Mateo, Eli, and Lena Reyes, legally and irrevocably yours." The gavel fell with a soft, resonant thud. Not an end, but a beginning. Outside, the autumn air was sharp and clean. Clara knelt on the courthouse steps, gathering all 3 babies into her arms, pressing kisses to their foreheads, her tears falling silently into their hair. Rodrigo crouched beside her, his hand on her back. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it," she corrected, looking up at him. "Together." He smiled, real, deep, the kind that reached his eyes. And for the first time, she saw not just a husband, not just a father, but a man who had been remade by love. That evening, back home, Clara stood in the nursery, watching the triplets sleep in their cribs. No longer borrowed, no longer temporary, but theirs. She ran her fingers over the names she'd painted on the wall in soft silver. Mateo, Eli, Lena. Rodrigo appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of tea. "They're ours," he said, as if still absorbing the miracle. She turned to him, eyes shining. "And I'm finally enough." He set the mugs down and pulled her into his arms, carefully, gently, like she was the most precious thing he'd ever held. "You were always enough, Clara. I was just too blind to see it." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I used to think motherhood was something that happened to you, like fate or biology. But it's not. It's something you choose. Every day. Even when you're scared. Even when you're tired. Even when the world tells you you're not enough." He kissed the top of her head. "And you chose them. Over and over." "I chose us," she whispered. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, scattering crimson leaves like confetti. Inside, the house hummed with the soft sounds of sleep. 3 tiny breaths, 2 steady hearts, and a love that had been broken, rebuilt, and finally, beautifully whole. Clara didn't need a title. She didn't need validation. She didn't need anyone to tell her she mattered. Because in the quiet glow of the nursery nightlight, with her children safe in their cribs and her husband's arms around her, she finally knew, not in her mind, but in her bones, that she was complete. Because she'd finally stopped measuring her worth against someone else's expectations. Rodrigo, too, had changed. He'd taken a sabbatical from his high-pressure job, started volunteering with a local mentorship program for at-risk teens, boys who, like him once, believed their value was tied to performance, legacy, control. He never talked about it much, but Clara saw the pamphlets in his coat pocket, heard the quiet phone calls he made in the evenings, offering rides, advice, sometimes just silence. One evening, as they tucked the triplets into bed, Lena clutching her lion plushie, Mateo still trying to crawl out of his crib, Eli already asleep thumb in, mouth. Rodrigo lingered in the doorway after she turned off the light. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. She nodded, following him to the living room where the fire crackled low in the hearth. He sat on the sofa, hands clasped between his knees, the firelight catching the new lines around his eyes. Lines carved not by stress, but by late-night smiles and early morning giggles. "I got a letter today," he said. "From the state." Clara's breath hitched. "About the adoption, is there?" "No," he said quickly, holding up a hand. "It's final. Legally, completely, forever." "That's not it." He paused, looked into the flames. "It's about me. They're starting a new foster parent training initiative, and they asked if I'd co-lead it." She blinked. "You," he smiled faintly. "The man who once said family had to be blood, yeah." "Me." She sat beside him, heart swelling. "What did you say?" "I said yes," he said, voice thick. "But only if I could be honest. About my journey. About how I was wrong. About how I almost lost everything because I couldn't see past my own pride." She reached for his hand. "That takes courage." "I didn't do it for courage," he said, turning to her. "I did it because of you. Because you showed me that love isn't about control. It's about surrender. About choosing someone every single day, even when it's hard." Outside, snow began to fall again, silent and steady. A week later, Clara accompanied him to his first session. She waited in the back of the community center room, watching as Rodrigo stood before a circle of nervous, hopeful faces, couples holding hands, single women with determined eyes, a man who kept glancing at the door as if ready to flee. "I'm not here because I have all the answers," Rodrigo began, voice calm but honest. "I'm here because I got it wrong. For a long time, I thought being a man meant building a legacy through blood. I told my wife she was useless if she couldn't give me children." A hush fell over the room. "And then life handed me 3 babies who didn't carry my name, my blood, or my past. And in loving them, I finally learned what it means to be a father. Not by accident. By choice." Clara's eyes filled. Afterward, a young woman approached him, eyes red. "My husband left me last month because I can't conceive. He said I failed him." Rodrigo didn't offer platitudes, just looked at her with quiet understanding. "Then he failed you, and that's not your burden to carry." As they walked to the car, snow crunching underfoot, Clara slipped her hand into his. "You're different," she said. "I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be," he replied. "Not the man my father wanted. Not the husband who demanded perfection. Just someone who shows up." At home, the triplets were asleep, their breaths soft and steady. Clara stood in the nursery doorway, watching Rodrigo gently adjust Eli's blanket, his movements slow, reverent. He turned to her, eyes shining. "I used to think I was giving them a family, but they gave me one too." She stepped into his arms, resting her head on his chest. "We all did." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in stillness. Inside, a man who once measured love in lineage now measured it in lullabies. in scraped knees kissed better, in bedtime stories read with silly voices. He didn't need to go back to his old life. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone, because in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the messy miracle of 3 small lives, Rodrigo had finally found his purpose. A shadow fell across the flowerbed. Clara looked up and froze. Standing at the edge of the yard was a woman she'd never seen before. Mid-30s, eyes wide with hesitation, clutching a tote bag like a shield. She wore a faded denim jacket and scuffed boots, and her gaze flickered between Clara and the children with a mixture of longing and fear. "Can I help you?" Clara asked, rising slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. The woman swallowed hard. I saw you at the park last week. With the triplets." Her voice trembled. "I've seen you a few times, actually. You're the one who adopted them, aren't you?" Clara's guard rose, not out of hostility, but instinct. "I am." The woman nodded, eyes filling. "My name's Jess. I work at the library downtown. I've been trying to get pregnant for 4 years." She let out a shaky breath. "My husband just left me last month. Said I'm broken. That I failed him." Clara's chest tightened. The words, so familiar, so cruel, echoed like ghosts. "I saw you," Jess continued, voice breaking, "laughing with them in the sandbox, covered in sand, and you looked so whole. And I needed to know." Her voice cracked. "Are you happy even though they're not yours by blood?" Clara didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, studying Jess. Not with pity, but with the sharp clarity of someone who'd walked through fire and survived. "Come sit," she said gently, gesturing to the porch swing. Jess hesitated, then followed. Clara poured 2 glasses of lemonade, cool, sweet, simple, and sat beside her. The triplets babbled happily nearby, unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding in their midst. "I was told the same thing," Clara said at last, voice low. "That I was useless if I couldn't give my husband children. I believed it for a long time." Jess wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Do you still feel that way?" Clara looked at Lena, who was now toddling toward her with outstretched arms. She lifted her daughter onto her lap, pressing a kiss to her sun-warmed hair. "Love doesn't ask for permission," Clara said softly. "It doesn't demand biology." Correcting her, because in every way that mattered, they were hers. Not by blood but by bond. Not by chance but by courage. Later, as they walked home, all 3 children sleepy and sticky-fingered, Lena reached for Clara's hand while Mateo clung to Rodrigo's. Eli, too tired to walk, was cradled in Rodrigo's arms, head resting on his shoulder, thumb in mouth. "You know," Rodrigo said quietly, as they turned onto their street, "I used to dream of a son who'd carry my name, my face, my legacy." Clara glanced at him, and now, he looked down at Eli's sleeping face, then at Mateo's proud stride, then at Lena's trusting hand in Clara's. "Now I realize I didn't need a mirror. I needed a miracle." She squeezed his arm. "We got 3. He stopped walking, turned to her. "No, we got 4. You were the first one." She didn't cry, not then, but her heart, once fractured, once silenced, beat so full and so fiercely she thought it might burst. That night, after story time and tucking, and whispered, "I love yous," Clara stood in the hallway, listening to the soft symphony of their breaths. Rodrigo joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "They're safe," he said. "They're loved," she corrected gently. He leaned his forehead against hers. "Because of you. Because of us," she whispered. And in that quiet hallway, bathed in moonlight and the hum of a house finally at peace, Clara knew this was the life she'd been fighting for. Not perfect, not painless, but profoundly, beautifully real. A home built not on expectation, but on grace. Not on blood, but on belonging. And in the soft glow of their children's rooms, she finally understood. She had never been useless. She had been waiting to become the woman who could love without conditions, who could heal without forgetting. And his arms around Clara's legs and rested his head against her knees. Rodrigo stood at the counter, slicing strawberries, humming a tuneless song, the same one he'd been humming for months, ever since he'd started sleeping through the night again. He glanced up, caught Clara's gaze, and smiled. Not the polite smile of coexistence, but the deep, quiet smile of a man who had found his place. She returned it, heart full. Later, as she packed lunches, apple slices, cheese cubes, peanut butter sandwiches cut into stars. Rodrigo folded laundry nearby, sorting tiny socks with the focus of a scholar. The house hummed with the ordinary magic of a life rebuilt. Then the doorbell rang. Clara opened it to find Daniel, the same Daniel from the park all those months ago, standing on the porch holding a small wrapped gift. He looked older, softer, less certain. "Hey," he said, shifting on his feet. "I heard, through mutual friends, that the adoption went through. I just wanted to say congratulations." She nodded, guarded but polite. "Thank you." He held out the package. "It's nothing big, just for them." She hesitated, then took it. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said quietly. "But I've been thinking a lot about that day in the park. About how I saw you with them and how I didn't see you. I saw a woman with kids. I didn't see the miracle." Her breath caught. He looked past her, into the house, where Rodrigo now stood in the hallway watching. Not with suspicion, but with calm acknowledgement. "I came to apologize," Daniel said. "Not just to you, but to the version of myself who thought love was about convenience, not courage." Clara's eyes filled. "You don't owe me an apology." "Maybe not," he said, "but I owe myself the truth. And the truth is, I lost something beautiful because I was too scared to believe in second chances." He turned to go, then paused. "You look happy, Clara." "I am," she said. "Not because everything's perfect, but because I finally stopped trying to prove I was enough, and just started living like I already was." He nodded, touched his fingers to his forehead in a small salute, and walked away. Rodrigo stepped beside her as the door closed. "You okay?" She leaned into him, the gift still in her hands. "Yeah, I think I finally am." That evening, after bedtime stories and toothbrushing battles and 3 rounds of one more hug, Clara stood on the back porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. Rodrigo joined her, handing her a mug of chamomile tea, still her favorite, still steeped just right. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked quietly. "The man I was, sometimes," she admitted. "But not with anger, with gratitude." He turned to her, surprised. "Gratitude? Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "Because if he hadn't said those words, I might never have discovered who I really was, and we might never have found them." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I used to think family was something you inherited. Now I know it's something you choose, every single day." Inside, a floorboard creaked. Lena stood in the doorway, clutching her lion, eyes wide. "Mama, can I sleep with you tonight?" Clara opened her arms. "Always." As they walked back inside, hand in hand, Rodrigo paused in the hallway, looking at the family photo on the wall. The one from the picnic, sunlit and imperfect and full of life. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. "He was wrong, you know?" "Who?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "The man I was," he said softly. "He thought your worth depended on your womb. But your worth was never in what you gave me. It was in who you became when everything tried to take you down." She looked at him, this man who had broken her, then helped her rebuild, and saw not regret, but reverence. And in that moment, the title that once felt like a wound. My husband said I was useless if I didn't give him kids. 3 years later, he saw her with triplets, transformed. Because it wasn't a story of revenge. It wasn't even a story of redemption. It was a story of truth. The truth that love doesn't demand perfection. It creates it, slowly, through showing up. The truth that a woman's value was never in her ability to conceive, but in her courage to love without guarantees. And the truth that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't carried in blood, but in the quiet, daily act of choosing each other, again and again. Outside, the fireflies danced. Inside, 3 children slept, safe and known. And Clara, once called useless, now stood in the heart of a home she'd built with her own two hands. Not despite her scars, but because of